The scene opens in the midst of a quiet but intense internal struggle. Imagine a person, let's say it's a man, mid-30s, sitting alone in a darkened room. He stares at the walls, but his eyes are vacant, distant, as if lost somewhere deep within himself. He's just received a message, a text, a call, or a letter that forces him to confront something painful. It could be a breakup, the loss of a job, or an existential crisis that has quietly been building over time. The emotional weight of the moment is heavy, but not in a way that is immediately obvious. There is no outburst, no visible tears or rage, only a tightness in his chest, a creeping sense of dread that builds the longer he avoids addressing it. He knows he's at a crossroads, but his first impulse is to look away, to numb himself, to do anything except face the discomfort. This impulse is instinctive, and it's one that we all know too well. We've been conditioned in society to view pain as something to avoid at all costs. Whether it's physical pain or emotional pain, we've been taught that it's a failure to suffer, a weakness. Our world glorifies pleasure and comfort, prioritizing quick fixes over meaningful growth. Pain is seen as the enemy, a signal that something is wrong, something to be eradicated at all costs. We turn to distractions, social media, television, food, even mindless scrolling to dull the edges of our suffering. The message is clear: pain is a problem and we need to fix it. But what if, instead of pain being a problem, it was an invitation? What if the very thing we fear most could become the key to our freedom? This opening section contrasts this societal perspective with the deeper, hidden truth. The more we run from pain, the more we make ourselves its prisoner. Pain doesn't just disappear because we refuse to acknowledge it. In fact, the longer we ignore it, the more it controls us. The man sitting alone in the room, in his silence, has already begun a psychological dance with his own suffering. Every moment he spends resisting it, his fear deepens. He is afraid of feeling the hurt, the disappointment, the loss. But what he doesn't realize is that the moment he decides to face that pain, he will gain the strength to transcend it. At first, the fear of pain feels like the natural impulse. It's only human to shy away from what causes us discomfort. However, when we allow fear to govern us in this way, we unknowingly give it power over our lives. The man in the room doesn't just fear the emotional pain of his situation. He fears the vulnerability that comes with it. He fears that confronting it will unravel him, that facing it will somehow break him into pieces that can never be put back together. This is where the illusion starts. We believe that avoiding pain is the path to safety, but in reality, we are merely postponing a reckoning that will eventually come for us, whether we are ready or not. This first section builds on the tension between illusion and reality, the illusion that avoiding pain leads to peace, and the reality that avoidance merely leads to a deeper entanglement with our own suffering. We are introduced to the core theme of the video: the more you fear pain, the more it owns you. The fear of pain creates a vicious cycle. The more we try to escape from it, the more it tightens its grip, pulling us deeper into its domain. The psychological truth is that the more we fear pain, the more we give it the power to define our choices, our relationships, and our sense of self. It becomes an invisible force that quietly shapes our lives, even though we may not always be aware of its influence. In the case of the man in the room, his fear of emotional exposure has already started to dictate his actions. He could reach out for help, take a step forward into the discomfort, and potentially grow from it. But instead, he remains stagnant, caught in the throes of avoidance. The section closes with a reflective transition. What if the pain you're running from is actually the key to the freedom you seek? This question hangs in the air, creating a moment of introspection for the viewer. Just as the man must eventually confront his own fears, the audience is gently urged to consider their own relationship with pain. What have they been avoiding? And what might happen if they chose to embrace it instead? The tension builds, and the promise of insight is just on the horizon. Now that we've established the tension between the fear of pain and the potential for growth, it's time to explore the psychological and philosophical underpinnings of this struggle. This section takes a deeper dive into the heart of the matter, exploring why we fear pain so intensely and how that fear ultimately controls us in ways we don't even realize. One of the core psychological concepts we must address is the idea of the shadow. a term coined by Carl Jung to describe the unconscious parts of ourselves that we repress or deny. The shadow is essentially the collection of traits, memories, and emotions that we deem undesirable or unacceptable, and as a result, try to bury them deep within our psyche. Pain, in this context, is often a shadow we refuse to acknowledge. We fear the emotional wounds that it brings, the vulnerability it exposes, and the discomfort it forces us to confront. Rather than embracing our pain and integrating it into our sense of self, we turn away from it, creating an inner split. We push the pain down, thinking that by denying it, we can escape its influence. But this very act of denial gives pain more power, because what we resist persists. The longer we suppress these emotions, the larger they grow, until one day they erupt, often in destructive ways. Jung argues that the shadow, when left unintegrated, will rule our lives in secret, controlling our behavior and decisions from the unconscious realm. This is precisely what happens when we fear and avoid pain. Our avoidance of suffering becomes an unconscious pattern that shapes every aspect of our lives. We start making choices based on fear, avoiding relationships because we might get hurt, staying in a dead-end job because we're afraid of the risk of failure, refusing to speak our truth because we fear rejection. In all of these situations, pain isn't just something we encounter, it is something we project onto the future, something we believe we must avoid at all costs. But what if pain isn't the enemy? What if pain is simply a message, a signal from the body and mind that something needs to change? Nietzsche, in his exploration of human existence, delves into the paradox of suffering. He famously stated, "To live is to suffer, to survive is to find some meaning in the suffering." Nietzsche's philosophy doesn't deny suffering. Instead, it invites us to embrace it as a transformative force. For Nietzsche, suffering is not something to fear or avoid, it's something to be embraced as a necessary part of becoming who we are truly meant to be. The very act of confronting pain can unlock a strength we didn't know we possessed. This shift in perspective, the acceptance of suffering as a path to growth, brings us to Viktor Frankl, whose seminal work, Man's Search for Meaning, details his experiences as a prisoner in Nazi concentration camps. Frankl argues that even in the most dire of circumstances, when we are faced with unimaginable pain, we can still find meaning in our suffering. The meaning we create in our suffering is what allows us to endure it, to transcend it, and ultimately, to transform through it. Frankl's core message is that we are not defined by our pain, but by how we respond to it. He offers a radical shift in thinking. Pain does not have to break us. It can be the source of our greatest strength if we can find meaning in it. In this section, we'll also address the external versus internal worlds. Society tells us that the avoidance of pain leads to success, comfort, wealth, beauty, pleasure, social validation. We are taught to escape discomfort and find happiness in external sources, material possessions, status, or the approval of others. But this external world is often a fleeting and fragile one. It's built on illusions, on external validations that ultimately leave us feeling empty and unfulfilled. On the other hand, the internal world, our relationship with our pain, our suffering, and our deepest fears, holds the key to true freedom. It is in the realm of our internal world that we can find the strength to transcend suffering, not by running away from it, but by facing it head-on. The more we focus on the external, the more we become disconnected from our inner world. This disconnection creates a false sense of security, one that can easily be shattered. As we seek external comforts to numb our pain, we lose touch with our own emotional truth. We become out of alignment with our authentic selves, chasing a life that is not truly our own. Pain, then, becomes a reminder, an invitation to return to ourselves, to our deeper truth, to the essence of who we really are. At this point, we draw a clear contrast between the external world's approach to pain and the internal approach that leads to liberation. The world encourages us to distract, to numb, to escape. The truth, however, is that this avoidance only tightens the chains that bind us. The more we resist pain, the more we give it control over our lives. But by embracing pain, by acknowledging it, we break free from its hold. It no longer becomes something to fear. It becomes a teacher, a guide, and a source of strength. As this section nears its end, we begin to see the first glimpse of the transformation that awaits. If pain is not the enemy, then the fear of pain is what truly holds us captive. The more we fear it, the more it controls us. But when we choose to confront it, when we choose to integrate it into our lives, we are no longer slaves to it. Instead, we begin to master it, and in doing so, we unlock a deeper sense of freedom than we ever thought possible. In this pivotal section, we witness the protagonist's journey from resistance to acceptance, from fear to freedom. The shift that happens here isn't just a psychological one. It's a deeply emotional transformation. The protagonist, who has spent so much of his life running from pain, now faces it directly. And with that confrontation comes the realization that pain is not something to avoid or suppress, but something to embrace and learn from. This is where the real transformation begins. As the protagonist takes his first steps toward facing his pain, the psychological shift starts to take place. Initially, it's excruciating. It feels unnatural, like stepping into the unknown. Pain, after all, has been the one thing he's worked so hard to avoid. The familiar patterns of numbing, distracting, and controlling his emotions are no longer effective. The techniques he once relied upon to keep the pain at bay only serve to intensify it. Every moment of avoidance now feels like a deeper trap, a greater betrayal of his own potential. But as the protagonist slowly learns to sit with this discomfort, something remarkable starts to happen. This is where Alan Watts' philosophy of acceptance and flow comes into play. Watts often spoke about the concept of surrendering to the flow of life rather than fighting against it. Pain, in this sense, is part of the flow. It is the natural ebb and flow of our existence. Just as the ocean has waves that crash and recede, our emotional and psychological lives follow a similar pattern. The mistake we often make is trying to fight the waves, thinking that by resisting, we can somehow stop them from coming. But in reality, it is only when we let go of resistance that we can ride the waves, allowing them to carry us through the storm to calmer waters. As the protagonist begins to accept the pain, he discovers that it no longer has the same power over him. It is no longer something to avoid but something to move through. This is the key insight that starts to transform his entire perspective on life. He begins to realize that his fear of pain was far more destructive than the pain itself. In fact, his fear of the pain was the very thing that kept him trapped in a cycle of suffering. Each time he tried to run from the pain, it chased him, becoming larger and more insistent. But the moment he faces it, the moment he stops resisting, he feels a sense of liberation, an unburdening of the heavy emotional weight he's been carrying for so long. The protagonist also comes to understand the deeper philosophical insight, that pain in its rawest form is not the enemy, it is a teacher. Nietzsche's philosophy echoes here, urging us to look at suffering not as something that diminishes us, but as something that can be transformative. Nietzsche famously said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." The pain we experience is not the defining factor in our lives. Rather, it is our response to it that shapes us. When we can find meaning in our pain, when we can transform it into a source of strength, we gain a kind of resilience that cannot be shattered by external circumstances. As the protagonist goes through this process of facing his pain, a subtle shift happens. There is no immediate breakthrough moment, no grand revelation. Instead, it's a slow, gradual unfolding. It's a subtle change in how he views the world. The world doesn't become perfect, but he does. His relationship with his pain has evolved, and in doing so, his relationship with life itself has changed. Where once he saw pain as a burden, he now sees it as an invitation to evolve. It's an invitation to let go of his fear of the unknown and embrace the impermanence of life itself. In this section, the pacing is key. It mirrors the protagonist's emotional journey, slow, deliberate, and introspective. There is tension, but it is not dramatic tension. Rather, it's the kind of quiet tension that builds from within as the protagonist makes small, yet significant, realizations. This is not a fast-paced journey of radical change, but a slow unfolding of truth. The power of this section lies in the rhythm of acceptance, the moment when we let go of control and allow life and pain to shape us. This realization reaches its emotional climax when the protagonist understands that pain, rather than breaking him, has made him stronger. He is no longer afraid of it, he is no longer defined by it. He has learned how to integrate it, how to move with it, rather than against it. The fear that once controlled him has now been transformed into a deep, internal strength. He can now look at his pain without flinching, without running, and in doing so, he has reclaimed his power. The imagery here will be important. As the protagonist moves through this emotional journey, the scene becomes less chaotic and more serene. The initial storm of emotions gives way to a quiet calm. The protagonist, in stillness, begins to feel a sense of peace. It is not a peace born from avoiding pain, but a peace born from accepting it. The silence in the room becomes a metaphor for the stillness within himself, a quiet realization that he has been freed from the chains of his own fear. At the height of this section, we could evoke a powerful moment of cinematic stillness, a pause in time where the protagonist sits quietly, feeling the weight of his pain, but no longer feeling burdened by it. The camera could zoom in on his face, showing the subtle relief in his eyes. The tension is not gone. It has simply been transformed into something else, something that now serves him rather than controls him. In a final, quiet moment of insight, the protagonist may reflect on how this process of transformation has led him to a deeper understanding of himself. I am not defined by my pain, he might think, or perhaps a simple realization, pain is part of me, but it does not own me. It is this moment that marks the true emotional breakthrough, the realization that by embracing pain, we find the key to a deeper freedom, one that is not dependent on the external circumstances of our lives, but on our internal response to them. As we approach the conclusion of this transformative journey, the narrative shifts back to the protagonist's life, but now through an entirely new lens. The man who once feared pain, who spent years avoiding emotional discomfort, now stands at the threshold of a new reality. This section reconnects with the opening scenario, the dark room, the overwhelming sense of dread, the message that triggered his emotional struggle, but with a profound difference. He no longer recoils from the pain. The internal battle is no longer one of resistance, but of acceptance. We see him now, not in a moment of panic or avoidance, but in a state of calm reflection. He has integrated the lessons of the previous sections into his life. Where once he might have drowned his sorrows in distractions, now he sits with them, allowing the full range of his emotions to pass through him without fear. There is a peacefulness in his presence, a quiet strength that comes from having faced what once seemed insurmountable. The world around him hasn't changed. He still faces challenges, losses, and disappointments, but his internal world has shifted. He no longer sees pain as the enemy but as a part of the fabric of his existence. It is no longer something to avoid, but something to embrace. This section is where we bring the insights of the previous sections into a larger, more universal context. As the protagonist reflects on his own journey, the narrative widens to consider the broader human experience. Pain is not an isolated experience, it is a shared aspect of the human condition. Every individual must face suffering in some form, be it physical, emotional, or existential. What separates those who transcend their pain from those who remain trapped by it is not the amount of suffering endured, but the way in which they respond to it. This final section underscores a central theme, the liberation that comes from embracing our pain rather than fearing it. The protagonist has realized that pain is not a life sentence, it is a powerful, transformative force that can guide us toward a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. It is through this process of integration, of accepting, confronting, and learning from pain, that we unlock the potential for personal growth and emotional resilience. We are not defined by the pain we endure, but by how we choose to rise from it. We can draw from the idea that pain is a teacher, a concept explored in various philosophical and spiritual traditions. It is not the suffering itself that defines us, but the wisdom we gain from it. Alan Watts once said, "The more a thing tends to be permanent, the more it tends to be lifeless." This is the crux of the insight. Life is not about achieving permanence or avoiding discomfort. It is about learning to flow with the natural rhythms of existence, including the inevitable moments of pain. Just as the ocean's waves are not permanent but constantly shift, So too must we learn to navigate the ebb and flow of our emotions. By embracing the impermanence of pain, we free ourselves from its grip. The protagonist now embodies this truth. He is no longer seeking to avoid the inevitable challenges of life. He is not numb to the world, but deeply attuned to it, able to experience the full spectrum of emotions without being overwhelmed by them. This is the kind of peace that comes not from control, but from surrender. It is the peace that arises when we stop running from our fears and start engaging with them fully. True peace, as the protagonist learns, is not the absence of pain, but the acceptance of it. At this point, we return to the metaphor of the storm, the psychological storm the protagonist weathered in the earlier sections. The storm has not vanished, but it no longer holds the same terror. He can now stand in the middle of it, feeling the winds of discomfort, and yet remain steady. The storm is no longer a threat, it is simply part of the cycle of life. And with that understanding, he has found his peace. The narrative here builds toward a poignant realization. The pain we try to avoid is not separate from our journey, it is the very path to our growth. We are invited to see that the pain we fear is often a doorway to a deeper, more authentic existence. The more we fear pain, the more we push it away, the more we become slaves to it. But when we choose to face it, we reclaim our power. The paradox is clear. In our effort to avoid pain, we give it control. But when we embrace it, we step into our freedom. The protagonist's journey is a reminder that pain does not have to define us. It can liberate us if we allow it to. The section closes with a powerful, reflective statement that ties together the emotional and philosophical threads of the video. The more we fear pain, the more we deny life itself. But when we stop running, we find that pain is not a prison. It's the key to freedom. This line serves as a poetic, timeless reflection, one that resonates with the audience long after the video ends. It leaves them with the thought that true peace is not about avoiding the pain of life, but about learning to navigate it with grace and acceptance. In this final moment of the narrative, we see the protagonist once more, but now with a subtle, quiet strength. He stands not in fear, but in acceptance. His journey is far from over, but he has learned the most crucial lesson, that life, in all its pain and beauty, is to be lived fully. He smiles, not because life is without hardship, but because he knows that he is no longer afraid of what comes. He is no longer controlled by pain. He has learned to use it as a guide, and in doing so, he has found peace. This conclusion leaves the audience with a sense of catharsis. It is a reminder that pain is not the enemy. It is a part of the human experience that, when embraced, can lead to the most profound forms of personal transformation. The journey to peace is not about escaping suffering, but about understanding it, integrating it, and allowing it to shape us into the people we are meant to become.